before I begin, I want to thank the staff for hosting these lectures. I also want to thank Magistel for doing the first lecture. Like, I appreciate her and her energy and being the one who kind of initiated this whole thing. So shout out to you guys. All right, so in our lecture, we're going to talk about theme and character, mostly about character. So I linked a supplemental which I created for you guys so you can follow along. Their notes, they're going to have a lot of jargon because this is mostly my way of explaining how to go about thinking about characters. My hope is that by using this, you guys can start thinking about your own character and theme. Start doing your own research. See if what I have to say adds. Well, you know, it's not like I'm just poetic, insane ramblings, but yeah, I will definitely guide you guys through all this. Thank you, Arts. Glad to volunteer. Sorry wasn't able to do the first one. This is actually my first time doing voice chat on Discord. I'm mostly a person who likes to just like write things out through the keyboard. So this is a good change of pace for me. All right. So if you guys have your notes opened up, what you're gonna see is a little diagram, and it's gonna have these boxes in it. And the black box is principle. And this principle is basically the unmoving center, the core of the story. It's going to be the soul of the story. It's basically if your character if your character were to betray their principle, that character no longer, in my opinion, should be the protagonist anymore. They would either have become completely corrupted, spiritually dead in a sense, or they would be like the antagonist, or they just wouldn't matter. It's like think about Anakin Skywalker, right? Like what his principles were. He got corrupted by the dark side. He is no longer eligible to be the protagonist of the Star Wars series. It moves on to Luke Skywalker. Um, so let's go ahead and draw something right here. We're gonna have our man, and let's say this part here is the principle. And then where the principle actually comes from, it comes from the character's origin story, right? The principle doesn't come out of a vacuum. There has to be something that kind of triggers the principle to awaken in the character, or it's transmitted to the character by another character, like say some sensei or a teacher or a guru or like a friend. They meet, they have a transmission, and then now the story begins at that point, right? And also the origin story, I'm calling it the genesis. In the notes, I call it the birth condition. Sometimes the story begins when the character is born, and a lot of mythologies, like they go through like the whole genealogy of one of the protagonists, and then it ends up with their birth, and that's sort of like where the story begins because back then heritage and lineage meant a lot. In modern days, the for superheroes especially, we have like an origin story in place of that, where you have like a normal person and something traumatic happens in them, but it also awakens their hidden powers, and then they use this hidden power, the hidden powers that they've been gifted from this trauma to go ahead and make the world a better place. Whatever. Sometimes they're an antagonist. They don't always fit the moral bill, but I want to clarify something that principles don't always they don't always equal morality. Principle is something that is so close and dear to the character's soul, where betraying the principle essentially means betraying their soul. And think of the case of Breaking Bad and Walter White. His main principle was um, never betray. He can kill people, sell drugs to people, mess up a lot of lives, but as long as he doesn't break that one rule, don't betray family, he was basically the protagonist. All right, that the story basically ends. I don't know if you've ever seen. I'm just gonna spoil Breaking Bad if you haven't seen it. It's super old, uh, but the story starts to reach its falling action when it starts to end when Walt gets his brother Hank Schrader killed and sells Jesse off to slavery, essentially. So let's go from the principle. A principle is also a mortal flaw, I think. That's going to go more into character. It can be related to the mortal flaw. So, principle is something more akin to the soul of a character, and this because see in the Genesis, if you look at the chart I drew out there, the principle exists before the character. So somewhere in the world of that the character setting of the world that the character exists in, the principle already exists. And the way I see it is the principle is transmitted into the character. The character doesn't it just doesn't you're they don't they aren't born with the principle. Um, there has to be an explanation for why the principle occurs in the character. This is the principle is basically what makes the character a protagonist, someone worthy of the narrative to follow. Um, in the case of Walter White, he has this whole thing with his father and his mother, like his the reason why he the family matters so much to him. But it's also the origin for Walter White, or it's the origin of his fatal flaw. He has a huge chip on his shoulder. Like he basically grew up poor, and that was a thing for him. That's right. That's the reason why he had to leave Gray Matters Industries, because Gray Matter Industries, the startup that he founded, which is worth billions of dollars, is co-founded by other billionaires, other rich people, and he doesn't exist in that world. So that always got to his ego. Like, and an explanation that he had to Jesse is that he sold his potential off to for $5,000 when his shares today, when Walter was talking about them, would have been worth billions, right? So that's sort of something that Walt sees. The he sees your placement in society via like the amount of wealth you accrue as your potential.
I'm too curious.
Is there a question? No, that's all good. I'm I'm reading the Discord, so if you guys have a question, just go ahead and throw it out there. If you have questions on what certain certain keywords in the notes mean, go ahead and ask those questions. It'll help me just like move along, because I could just talk about. I guess I could just stay on the principle for as long as needed. But to go back to Art of Joe, the mortal flaw is related to the need, right? So the need is sort of like what is absent. It's sort of like a hole or a gap, or it's like a fissure that inside your soul. And the need is the need exists in order to kind of drive the story forward. It's an absence in a sense, and they need to fill in that absence uh, through progressions, right? And oftentimes the need is actually contradictory to the society that the character lives in. So we also have a chart here. We have needs and wants. Wants are something that are put into you by the setting. They're put into you by whatever it exists in the world. So like a want is something like I need that car. You don't actually need it, but you want it. And your wants are subject to change over time. That's why the wants are kind of superficial. They're more like distractions. They're things that characters think that they need, whereas the need of the character is something that exists on the subconscious or unconscious plane. Oftentimes, you don't know what you need in life, and the need and wants chart kind of reflect this. So when a character moves towards the needs, they're kind of moving toward their more authentic, right? The more Walter White moved towards trying to accumulate wealth because it's such a psychological scar that he had to try and heal himself by accumulating wealth in such a taboo way. He's moving more and more into his authentic self, which the authentic self isn't like some sort of angelic ideal that exists, and that the authentic self is who you really are underneath all the impositions that the world puts upon you. Like the world tells you, like be a good civilian, a good citizen, etc. Sometimes your authentic self is like an actual good person. You step out of line to help someone do something that uh, is still taboo because it wasn't asked for you, but you go the extra mile to accomplish it. That's a sort of like positive example of an authentic. Like if you think about superheroes, their authentic self is actually their superhero persona. That's their authentic self. That's them stepping out of society to express this sense of vigilantism um, in order to express the psychological need to help others with their powers, but they're also basically helping themselves out, trying to heal themselves, trying to heal that trauma, eliminating the cause of it in society, in the environment, in the world, in the setting. Uh, when a character moves towards want, like a downward trend, they're moving towards the more superficial aspect of who they are, like the self that is mandated or help that's constructed by society. So they're moving away from their authentic self and going back into the mode of comfort, right? If you remember the hero's journey, you move towards the underworld, the place of mystery and um, darkness, oftentimes, and the taboo world. And this is where you find your authentic self, right? Sometimes your authentic self manifests as a demon, or you basically otherized your authentic self through an enemy, right? And then the enemy becomes a teacher. The antagonist becomes a teacher that reveals to you by stripping away all your uh, what we want is we know what their core principle is, what they are at their deepermost in their most level. Then we need to create all their qualities around them. They're mutable, the things that change over time, like their age, their appearance, what fashion they're into, what foods they like, what sports they're into. These are all mutable. They can change over time. Um, there's many reasons for this. I don't want to go into it. You know, like there's many reasons why people change over time. Any questions? All right. So I'm just going to move on into the next part. We're going to go into the examples. We're going to talk about, so we have four examples. First one is Gil, and this one is by Qubit. So Qubit, thank you for volunteering your character. We're going to use him as an example here. So we got Gil up. All right, so here I'm basically trying to illustrate how this principle of Genesis works. All right. So in Gil's backstory, and in everything you do for the principle, basically goes back into their backstory. It's basic. This is something that sort of, if you read the character sheets on Void, like this is something you want to like encode into their DNA, and then it gives you, when you go back and read it, it gives you clues as to what the character is all about. So for the first Genesis, we have the historical Hong Gil-dong, which is he's a kind of a Korean version of Robin Hood, and based off of what I read from him, he was dissatisfied of being the second born son. So his whole principle was towards freedom and self determination, deciding who he wants to be. So he doesn't he his whole identity isn't determined by social factors. He wanted to break free of that. So that's sort of like what I kind of saw in um, in Hong Gil-dong. And I moved it on to Genesis 2. So sometimes characters have two Genesis depending on how much history you reference. And theoretically, you can keep moving the Genesis back and back and back, all the way up until the Big Bang, potentially, because everything originates from the Big Bang. Kind of lofty concept, but you can always trace something back to a prior cause. So in the second Genesis, this is sort of where it kind of begins to matter a little bit more. In modern times, the name Hong Gil-dong refers to a John Doe, actually, in Korean society. You know, a John Doe is someone who doesn't have an identity. And the way this is kind of phrased in the character Gil that Qubit has created is that Gil does not really have an identity of his own. He's taken up the identity of the myth of the historical Hong Gil-dong. So the character Gil is in himself a John Doe, but he's pushing it even farther, going further back in history towards the historical Hong Gil-dong. All right, and he is sort of a, what would you call, a cyber terrorist or like a hacker. He's sort of like an information. He works a lot with information, and he in the this has a huge implication for contemporary times because one of the themes you can extrapolate from that is that we give ourselves away a lot to um, devices that register what we search on into algorithms. So eventually, what happens? Corporations or moneyed interests can build a profile, um, can profile us based off of our interest. And this information, because we're giving them this information, that our information is being tracked. Other forms of information are constantly tracked as well, like our phone numbers, our locations, GPS locations, our social security numbers, all of that is being tracked. So then our identities are sort of they become like the currency, right? Remember how I mentioned that Hong Gil-dong, the historical one, he's sort of a Robin Hood. Then the way that translates to contemporary times is a person who mines information, someone who's a hacker, right? But instead of looting um, gold, treasures, jewelry, they're looting information in of itself. So then the correlation is complete. Like we have a delicious golden triangle of information, identity, and a myth, a Robin Hood myth. And with that, you can extrapolate a whole bunch of themes that comes with it. And what Cubit has told me, one of the things he wants to do is create this push and create a theme or a premise of moving toward authenticity and this persona of a historical figure, right? So through development, the character will move towards their authentic self, developing who they are, and then coming back down into and leaning back into their persona, right? And then what the risk of this is if the character leans too much into the persona, they run the risk of being possessed by the sort of the mythic time of the hero, the archetype of the hero. They no longer have their own agency, rather their agency has been co-opted by an ideal, like a dead person, right? This is like a form of self-mortification, as some psychologists would put it. So this is a form of death, actually. If the person was to totally lose himself in this person, whereas this would be life. And then the interesting thing I noticed about Cubit's character is a lot of these moneyed interests, these corporations, they can't exist without a prior historical precedent. So, in a way, Gale imitates these moneyed interests by propping himself up on the foundations of the historical. A lot of governments do the exact same thing. They have their own myth, like, oh, we had this glorious revolution from so and so BC, and now here we are today. We are like we are a proud nation, and our government is the one that is pushing for this our heritage, etc. Gil is basically doing the exact same thing. So he runs this parallel with people he perceives as his enemies. All right. And then there's so much you can do with that. There's so much you can work with that because that puts Gil's soul at risk. That's going to push his principle of freedom and self determination. Um, it's going to put a lot of tension on that principle. All right. So he has to do his thing, steal information, whatever, but he can't betray his principle of freedom. All right. So that's very good, Cubit. I like your character a lot. There's so much potential with that. I'm just going to move on to the next character. Um, we have Proto. I'm going to roast you, but I'm going to roast you right now. All right. So this is so you also have like one in the Genesis 2 at Proto 2 because you reference a specific creature called a Spinosaur. I'm not deep into dinosaurs. I know of them. I'm not crazy about them, but I get what's going on. So I have to write a Genesis. It references the Spinosaur, right? And in the way, like, we can go into like the way you describe a Spinosaur, a competitor of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It is powerful. That's the one thing I think you're trying to convey across is the Spinosaur. It represents a life form that has power. All right. So we just move forward into time into the second Genesis, which is Cryotech. The moment that Cryotech Corporation creates Proto 2, and then we can actually split this into two more Genesis. C's. There's the Genesis of Proto 1, right? Um, but we haven't given enough information about Proto 1, so I've contracted that into just one form of Genesis. We have Crowdtech, the Incorporated States of America, and the detail is there's some kind of failure with Proto 1, so they had to create another Proto 2. Their enemies is Void City. So here we have we have a lot of things going on right here. We have two major powers, all right? There's Krautic and Void. And whenever you have two competing forces, they always exist on a polarity, all right? So they appear to be negatives of one another. Like they represent the opposite. They're in opposition with each other. So for whatever reason, Incorporated States of America hates Void City, and that's good enough for a Genesis. You don't give away all your secrets in the beginning, guys. There is something called writing. I mean, it's good to overwrite for yourself, but for the consumption of your audience, you don't want to overwrite. You give away too much of the secret of the mystery, then there is little to no point for the audience to invest in the story because they've already figured it out. It's like, oh, it's already been explained to us. Let's move on. All right. So they don't have to invest any thoughts or feelings about it because it's already been explained. It's like it's a done deal. It's concluded. Moving on. You don't want that to happen. You don't want your audience to move on. You want your audience to linger as long as possible. You have to keep the show going. And so you don't want to over explain your backstory. All right. So the reason why Spinosaur is there because Cryotech sees some kind of ideal in the Spinosaur. For them, Spinosaur represents some value that they want to express into the world. All right. So Art has a question. Is there a general guideline on what explaining goes into over? If you give away the secret, you've over yourself. There isn't a general guideline. You always want to keep your audience guessing and speculating. If you've given too many clues where the audience says, oh, and it turns out to be this, the story becomes audience interest. Basically, you don't want to be predictable. You want an MO, you want a pattern, but you want to build a pattern in a way where so many other different things can, right? You want there to be many different potential outcomes. But you as you always want to push the story forward in the outcome that generates the most value. So here we are with Crowdtech. So I wrote their premise along the line of brutality. All right, so he's working off of this brutality as truth, and that insinuates that a soul predator, the ideal, what you should be looking for. A singular predator, as much power you can pack into it. But with the premise, every premise is supported by so every thesis needs an answer. This is what this is right here, this chart right here. This chart represents thesis, and it represents antithesis. Antithesis means whatever the premise is, it's not true. Because look at all these examples. So with Proto, we have, in my eyes, I see the brutality is the highest as the premise. The antithesis, would that be nature actually favors mutualism over individual strength. And a principle for Proto 2, from what I can see, is actually strength. I don't know the actual premise for Proto 2 yet. It's one of those things that seems like it's going to reveal over time. But regarding the character itself and how the first round went, it seems like there's a lot of implications. I know people were speculating that like Proto 2 used to be that dog was Proto's pet. So it seems to me that whatever happening is happening to Proto, he's on a journey where it's taking him backwards. It's actually a regression from what what he as a human is used to. So a human is used to forming connections, forming mutualistic connections with other life forms, other people, other animals, right? In Proto 2's case, it seems like he's moving past that in a mode of regression towards an animalistic brutality, where the connections that he had in his past life, he is trying to go past, right? So that actually, to me, that fits the theme that's been built so far. Um, and with Proto 2, there's also actually like a contradiction or a paradox, not a contradiction, a paradox as well, because a corporation is built up of groups of individuals who are who are mutualistically working together, right? So that's the huge paradox, is that is Proto as a soul, where the ideal is the social Darwinistic ideal of the most power you can pack it to a singular being is created by an entity that's composed of multiple beings, right? So I like that paradox a lot as well. So that's some good shit. We'll just move on. We got Itami. So Riken, there is a lot for Itami. I kind of remember her family members. The way she's written in in the way from the lore that I know of Void with her relatives that are created by other characters, she kind of exists more as a supporting character and not as like a protagonist in her own right. And then there's a couple of reasons for that, and I'm just gonna go over them with you. Um, the genesis here is her clan, her lineage. Her lineage is of Lado martial arts. So, and another thing you wrote in her backstory is that her lineage has a secret power within it, a hidden power within it. So that means, so what that suggests to me, Rika, when you say that, is that you are prioritizing this information about her family above all other facets of her family, right? When you say that, you're suggesting everything else is kind of secondary to this, that her family is a martial arts secret power. That's what you're prioritizing. That's what you're saying is the most important thing. Um, so, but it's kind of there's a lot of like contradictions with that I found with her character, which is first like just the martial arts lineage in general. It implies that her family had an enemy in the, and the reason why they kept up the lineage is to preserve their knowledge in order to maintain whatever status they have in their culture. It could be political status, it could be cultural importance, like their national heritage, something like it. Like they're known for this. Their family is known for this. Um, or it could mean that the enemy that her family is fighting still exists somewhere, and there's no way to defeat them. So in your backstory, you said Tom, she is she is defying her family tradition in order to do her own thing. But the the contradiction I found is that because there's no stress for her to like remain. I mean, she clearly has that. She has some hidden power because you mentioned it in her backstory. There isn't any stresses on the clan to maintain uh, their family structure, like any structure they have of like using their family members as warriors in any ongoing struggle. It doesn't seem to be there, which means that they're not under pressure by any enemy. And if that's the case, then they could be eccentrics. The family could be eccentric in their own right. But then, if they're eccentric, then what is she of? If they're eccentric and she has the freedom to be whoever she wants to be, like what is she defying ultimately? So it's there's a little bit of contradiction because the principles of her family aren't translating into her character. Um, so she also seeks fame. There isn't really an explanation why she wants to seek fame. Um, her wanting to seek fame implies a celebrity from pop culture, but there is the backstory. There isn't really you haven't really gone into it that deeply. Um, So that kind of suggests to me that she is seeking fame from the masses, which suggests to me that she hasn't been getting love from her home. Like maybe her family members are giving the love to favorites. They're playing favorites. And Natami is sort of like, she's kind of been neglected in that sense. But that doesn't seem to be the case because she seems close to so that's another contradiction. And then things I that I would like to be explained is like what is the difference between a performer and a warrior in his point of view because she still keeps up with the martial arts, right? She's kind of juggling these two things of being a warrior and being a performer or like a celebrity. So there isn't a so it just seems to me that there isn't any contradiction or conflict between these two aspects of her life. So that kind of is in contradiction to her being in defiance of her family lineage. Um, and then another thing I would like to know is like if she puts more value in the love of her family or more value in the crowd, and if there's a difference between those two, or if there's no difference at all. Um, so yeah, it's just a lot of there's a lot of things that you want to think about. Or you want to go back and if you wanted to rewrite her back into her relationship with her client, you want to start there. And if you still want her to be a celebrity, why does she want to be a celebrity? Who influenced her to have that and to put that inside of her? All right, you know these things are these are the things you really want to think about creating a character. All right, so let's move on. We're moving on to the next part, and this is sort of like where theme kind of goes in. I noticed that I myself I haven't really gotten into what premise is. Um, Premise is sort of like it's sort of the focus of the story. Like I wrote it up in the first page. The premise is what the story is trying to prove, right? So that is sort of like the right. So story premise and need they go hand in hand. Walter White he needs to prove that he needs to prove his potential by selling methamphetamines, right? That's sort of the premise. The premise of Breaking Bad is um, meth chemist, a chemist who turned into a drug lord, essentially. That's the premise of Breaking Bad. And I guess what the premise, if you want to go further into the premise, is can a family man maintain a drug empire? All right, is a better way of describing the premise for Breaking Bad. Can a family man maintain a drug empire and a normal suburban life? So, if you watch Breaking Bad, you know how far that show pushes the concept of family and and how to maintain a family and a drug empire, and like what are all the conflicts that arise out of that. So another thing about premise is that it's a thing that causes conflict to arise. It pushes the story forward. So that's another thing you want to remember about the premise. All right, for Donovan, I could probably, um, if I can think of another like, a part two to this lecture, I probably just might go into like how to create like a theme map. That's actually what I wanted to do is like how to connect string concepts together to prioritize where your story is going visually and thematically and symbolically, uh, semiotically, how to use visual language to convey what you're trying to get at, what the point you're trying to make. That's actually what I wanted to do. I had to lay the groundwork before that, of course. Yeah, I'm reading what you guys are. All right, so we have this Venn diagram, all right, and this is sort of like a contraction of the first diagram, where you have three boxes. You have the principle, which is the soul, and you have the premise, which contains a thesis and antithesis, and then you have the character, which is all this is mutable. Right? These are things that are subject to change over time. Um, Here we have the exact same thing. We have the mutable part of the character. We have the premise, and we have the principle. And it's ditto for this part as well. And then I name this challenger and opponent. So this is something. So this is sort of to get to align this with typical void battles, where it's 1v1, and it's basically you're doing a study between two characters, how they're going to work a situation out in a battle. And this is sort of like what I'm trying to convey is like how to start thinking about void battles, or like what is a good way to think about void battles. I'm not telling you you should think about void battles in this way. I'm just saying that maybe this is something that might want to consider in order to, or maybe there's something I can say that will help you engage the readers more towards the story that you've put blood, sweat, and tears into creating. Right. So you put blood, sweat, and tears to creating a battle. You want people to read it, right? It feels good, and it helps motivate you to make more battles and to keep practicing stories, right? And it's good for the audience too, because if they read a satisfactory story, they feel good about propping you up, like giving you their investment, their value. They say, "This is a good story. I'm glad I read it because it was a good use of my time and energy. I'm glad I read this. There's something I got out of it, right?" So it's mutually beneficial to really start thinking about how to structure battles in a certain way where everyone wins. It's a win-win. So here we have the overlap between the two characters, and I've connected. Oh, we have a question. So in the case of Breaking Bad, you word it as that can these opposing endeavors work? Which one will pick? Structuring link, following for a story. is either ill-advised mindset. Basically, the log line is sort of like the elevator. It's a little different from the premise, but it's very much parallel to the premise. Like if you can make the premise and the log line almost identical, like then that means, and if you can pitch your, that means you're basically pitching the premise in and of itself, right? As a log line. A log line is something that is sort of like a selling point, something that helps sell the story to like someone you're pitching to. It's a little different from premise, which is like the the seed, uh, the seed idea for a story, which is like basically you're using as a reference for to keep yourself on the path. So log lines and premises are a little bit. Okay, the premise, yeah. So you meant the premise. The premise can be worded, which will he pick? Because and a lot of times, a lot of characters they struggle with inner conflict. Inner means there's two forces within you, or two forces that are acting up your psyche, right? Which force are you gonna is which force is gonna win out in the end? It can be worded like that, actually. The reason why I worded it as opposing endeavors work because it leaves. It's because I actually left something out with thesis and antithesis because it's already too much to just. Thesis is basically the same thing as your premise, the thing you're trying to prove, right? It's the antithesis is the arguments against. There's a third thing called synthesis, right? And synthesis means the character wants to have their cake and eat it. That's what a synthesis is. They want to have best of both worlds. And the way a character goes about synthesis is they make deals, they lie, cheat, blackmail, do whatever it takes to have best of both worlds. So they aren't, they don't have to experience as much. They don't have to experience a total split. They want to incorporate both both parts into themselves, and that's why I worded it like that because it includes the possibility of synthesis. Right. So wording it like that, it just gives you more options. So to get back to the Venn diagram that we're on here, we have a positive and a minus. These are positive mean they are antagonistical. This is the part where the characters are opposing one another, and the plus is the part where they're actually mirror or parallel one, like the things that make them similar. All right, and I've put an example down below. We'll get that. This is the red and blue character by Flash. So we'll get into that, but I kind of want to know what everything is in this. So here I have a bridge between the two premises of the character of the challenger and the opponent. All right. So each character has their own premise and has a thesis and an antithesis. All right. Same thing with your opponent. So they have a thesis and an antithesis. So starting positions is, let's just say challenger and the opponent. The challenger is on the upswing towards this, right? They're heading towards authenticity, whereas the opponent is inauthentic. They're distracted. They're not on the right course. They're operating on a downward swing towards antithesis. All right. When we connect these two together, the premises of both characters, they are entanglements, right? In quantum physics, there's a thing called, if one thing happens to one particle, it causes a corresponding change in another particle, no matter how far apart they are, which is a type of mystery. This bridge, the this sort of thing, this dynamic of a thesis and antithesis, uh, synergizing between two characters is also a kind of when they come into contact and there is a conflict. This conflict needs to be worked out. All right, and by the end of the conflict, the end result, the consequence is that they may or may not break off. They might still be attached. So we'll just do a partially broken bridge. This just signifies that they are in a new state. All right. This is the uh, consequence of whatever actions taking that took place in the conflict occurred. What you want is to happen is the C and an O. There's a C and an O. What you want to happen is the challenger moves into the mode of antithesis, whereas the opponent moves towards thesis. They don't have to be drastic change. They can just be a tiny increment where they're moving up or down. And in the next battle, the preceding battle after that, maybe the change is this much instead of this much. All right, but you always want to make it so that the character is going up and down like this towards thesis and antithesis. So maybe sometimes some battles they're like this. If they're like this, then maybe you'll want to do a course like this, or maybe you want to keep them up there for a while because this them being up here is actually very interesting. All right, maybe the audience wants to see the characters up like this for a good while, but eventually they have to go down and have like the corresponding. Maybe they go down like way right, and then you would just create a new graph out of that where they are in this hellhole, all right, where they're going up and down. They're trying to get and they're back on course, right, with their original goal. Maybe they have to go to hell and come into contact with their principle to understand how much the principle matters. Right? Maybe they're taking their principle for granted. So now their soul is at risk of damnation. So they have to kind of be in this place for a little bit. And it doesn't even have to be a literal hell. You can choose a setting that is a metaphor for your grandma's house, right? They have to be in grandma's house for 3 battles, and it fucking sucks. But they discover something vitally important in grandma's house where it relates to their soul. So now they're able to and go back into the world outside of grandma's house. There's so much you can work with here. So arts and goodies has the challenger and opponent have to be on opposite paths, or could they both be in thesis and antithesis? Yes. So you can kind of chop it up like this, actually, arts and goodies, where they could be thesis, antithesis, or thesis, or antithesis, or a. This is basically the same thing. These two, but these two, they're as enabling, or I guess codependent, or reinforcing. This is like a codependent reinforcing type of action. So I'm glad you caught on to that. So maybe what happens in a battle is that they meet someone who is also going up, right? Maybe they go up in parallel, right? It really depends on the character. Maybe they do have clashing premises, right? Where it's sort of like this, all right? But if they're meant to end up in different places, they there might not be a shift, or unless what happens is if they both have the exact same goal, that means there could only be one winner of this conflict, right? They're both on an upswing, so someone has to go down, all right? Only one of them can go. If that's the case. Um, Sometimes they might be able to out where they have like a synthesis where they're able to negotiate, but that might have to be like one hell of interesting negotiation where everyone wins. That's actually quite a positive story. That, I want to say that that's in danger of being boring. It really just depends on how you sum up your writing. All right, so Cozy Spoons has a question for me right. I may be cutting a line, so ignore a litany of questions, but how do you maintain or tackle a story arc storyline of fail losing the battle? All right, so this kind of goes into my theory that there's like four different characters that people create. I'm just gonna list them off quickly. Um, it, that is something that's like kind of the writer's personality. For me, I kind of identify there's a non-differentiated character, which they're kind of ambiguous in their backstory. These characters have a lot of growth, but they also have a lot of potential to go haywire because their backstory is as solid. And their backstory would have to be cemented in either the interest or respect. That's the thing you want for the rest of this character's. Um, there's another character which is like the character. Um, in the past, I know brought in their pets and they've reacted very, very poorly when their character loses. You know what I mean by a pet character. This is like some they they made out of their own cellular characters. There's a collage type characters. These are characters that have a that's going not clear what their principles are. Uh, there's a lot of contradictory and collage characters. It kind of suggests to me that the writer can't is kind of they can't really decide what is interesting about this character. And then there's also competitive characters. These are characters that are made for a specific purpose and voice. This is sort of like Proto 2. Proto 2 would be a very good example because Rhino expressed that they created Proto 2 just so that they could destroy muscles. And that Antares, she's kind of a competitive character too. I made her because I wanted to compete in speed deathmatch. Sometimes a competitive character start working on their own stories, but I noticed that a lot of competitive characters, like once they're whatever they're used for, they're kind of done because once they're a lot of competitive characters are used in competitions. Once the competition is over, like that means the story is over. There's nothing more to see, right? And then you would really have to think about what what's the original principle of that character. Like you would actually have to like more deep. Um, so the reason why I brought that up because I wanted to create pets, right? Like, how do you loss? As long as the principle of the character remains untarnished, you can do anything, literally anything. You can change however much you want. Like you can literally take a character's brain and put them in a robot body and destroy the reclaim that body, or just like mutate them over and over, like with how Mr. Kent did with one of his characters. His character was just constantly mutating. But the magic of that character was that the principle of a character. So you literally can do anything. You can have a on a continuous losing streak. All right, as long as the principle doesn't change, you can do anything with them. You can change their morale. You can turn a goody two shoes character into a ruthless killer. All right, as long as their principles keep pushing that, pushing that, pushing that, to see how far you can push that character. Like a Misona. Yeah, like Misonas, they can be. That's a little that I that can kind of overlap with the pet characters. Like I said, I only identified four. There's probably like 12 or 10. I don't know how many types of characters. Um, yeah. I hope that answers your spoons. I'm just gonna move on to the Rikun says you mentioned a lot of contradiction. Is it would it be reasonable then for me to look back and retcon? So, I mean, retcons. They like you would have to put yourself. Rikun, you would have to put yourself into a position that Tommy is a work in. That's the attitude you need to have. Like all the battles, you would just have to kind of like in your mind just say like all these battles I did with Tommy, they were just me working out what it is about this character that I like, and then just chalk it up to work in progress. All right. So that's the attitude I would take for Tommy if you want to retcon her. I would act. I would here's what I would do for Rikun if like you haven't explored her relationship to her parents or to her ancestors. That's a storyline that I would like to see you pick up. It's just like she returns home back to her planet and she remembers all these things, all these crazy things about ancestors, her parents, and then all of a sudden now like there's a situation that arises where like the skeletons in the closet that relate to her parents like is brought back up, and now she has to deal with it. That's something you might want to work with. I don't know what you maybe for you a retcon would be a better way to go. It really depends on what comfortable like what your feeling is. If you're feel like a retcon is the right way to go, then go for it, man. It's really up to you. As long as it fits these processes, you need like a lot of things that artists do. They end up overthinking, and it's not good because an artist needs to trust. What an artist needs to do is trust their intuition a lot of the times. Right? Intuition is informed by trial and error. Like you did something, it didn't feel right, so you know, like in certain situations when this will be right or well, it's wrong in this situation. Will it be right in this situation? Right? You know, that's intuition needs to be informed of what feels right and what feels wrong. So I implore you to trust your intuition, and if you feel as though retconning her feels right, then go for it. So Rikun is responding. Yes. So I would just go back into it because the family is her genesis. Like that's oftentimes people create they contrive a like a quick origin story for their character just to explain some things. But what they don't realize is that that genesis, that thing that explains, is the seed of that character, right? It's their genetic material. It's their DNA. if there ever was something you want to explore about a character, you always that explains how they got to where they are. Or the origin story. If you're lost, always go back to the origin because the origin automatically, by virtue of being a is rooted in all these different connections, right? All these different themes. And the beauty of that is that you don't have to rely on your character anymore. You can rely on the origin, and that would uh, inform you of the network of themes you can work on, right? And you just connect themes related to the origin story and the themes related to your character. You connect them together to this one thing. Oh, you now have a new story. You have a new plot line. That's something you can explore if it's interesting to you. If it benefits the character, if it makes them more increases their value, if it solidifies their backstory, um, more mythic, more heroic, go for it. Bruce's is. I am just while you guys are talking, I'm gonna go into Flighty. So this is based off of her most recent Beyond battle, um, which involves two characters. And the thing about I like about this battle is that it lends itself a lot to speculation because you're building up to a competition between these two characters. There's Ray, who goes to Blue, but currently Ray and Blue they're separated, so Ray has no protection. She's in an hostile environment she cannot control, and she's up against. She's in the den of the dragon, so to speak. All right. So in the very last page of the note on the Ray and this antagonist, this Mother Superior character, I didn't get. I was writing the notes really quickly. I apologize to you, Flighty, if you did. I just wrote Mother Superior. That was sort of her role within the cult that you've depicted in the comic. Um, so I kind of I'm here with I'm trying to demonstrate exactly how this Venn diagram works. All right. So it still corresponds to the alt diagram where the circle is the big circle is the character, smaller circle is the premise in relation to the context of the story of and the principle of the character, right? So again to reiterate, the principle coincide with one another. So Ray has mystery about her, and she doesn't understand these mysteries. So, in the interest of driving the story, understand her powers because that is something you can dive into deeper and deeper mysteries and develop more and more with if Ray comes into contact with this need to understand her powers, right? And she is in conflict with this need to understand her powers, uh, her sense of wanting, of desiring self of control over her personhood within this cult, right? She's in a hostile environment. If she is to understand, my thinking is if she would have to incrementally give up more and more control to these cultists in order to understand it. And that is the big danger here. So this is really good, this setup, is that in order to understand her authentic self, she needs to give up control to people who have keys to helping her understand her authentic self. And there's a lot of tension, and I love that. All right. So we go with the Mother Superior. The Mother Superior, she controls the entire that Ray is stuck in. All right. So what I kind of find her is this desire to do, or she failed with this previous daughter figure. She projecting her relationship, this daughter figure, onto Ray, and she wants to make the best, right? And she has this need to accomplish perfection, right? It's a very unreasonable. Obviously, I don't have to explain why perfection is completely unreasonable, but she has the psychological. This is sort of like her. I kind of got that sense of her when she's tearing, when she's critiquing, she's critiquing every second we can make better. Blah blah blah. So that kind of like lends itself to explaining this psychopathy in her, is like this psychopathy and this need for perfection, they are aligned to one. I got that sense also when she was staring at these very uh, macabre paintings of dissected humans, right? She's trying to go deeper into mysteries of the human being. Like, is like, where is the soul of Descartes, and like the enlightenment figures trying to really get at the core of what a human being actually is, right? So she is very much invested in mystery, right? Powers beyond the grave, desires to control life after. Ray is closely linked to this type of force that is beyond the grave, so to speak, because she's the thing that puts them at odds is like knowledge and experience. Mother Superior has knowledge; she controls. She has all the powers. So Ray is at her mercy in a sense. So she has no choice but hopefully, to make things interesting, what Ray does is she ingenious ways to sabotage Mother and sabotage cults while fending herself off from being completely dissolved as a person in this cult, right? So a lot of interesting arise out of this confrontation between these two characters. All right, and then I also explained in the previous layer the the, the modality between thesis and antithesis. That's sort of what I was trying to come across with this mirror moment, the stuff that goes from this timeline that goes down from the Venn diagram, right? For the mirror moment, right? When these two characters come into contact with the premise, she either gains more control or loses part of it. For the Mother Superior, she will either nurture or both. These aren't very well thought polarities, but just given like in the situation, like the best I come up with, probably the has their own idea of like how they're gonna go about doing this. All right, maybe she already has a plan. So this is just my interpretation, given what I can see, what I can extrapolate out of that one. All right, is this what Flighty's gonna do? Of course not. All right, maybe she already has it. Right? This is just like I'm just using it. Um, and then here I kind of portray like they both undergo a certain amount of change from each confrontation that they have. And maybe the Mother Spirit becomes more and more insane, Ray becomes stronger and stronger, or Ray becomes more and more dissolved. We'll see in the next installment of like. So I'm just gonna read a little bit more what you guys have to say. So Russus says, in the case you don't want to explore their, how big of a difference does it make in mind the backstory as a point of reference between the curtain? Any recommended ways to lay the brick without suddenly Tory diatribes? So Russus, what you want to do, the most you want to do if you want to keep that in the backdrop is explain the circumstance of how they came to be in the intro story. The intro story in itself should explain how they came to be where they or give at least give um, at the very most you want to explain where like you maybe you want to say their principle comes from people that they are close to. All right, you don't have to be direct. You just say this principle comes from this. All right, um, or you can say the principle comes from a general principle comes from. Everyone has different origins for where the principle comes from. You just honestly, what you want to do is just keep in mind that that characters are operating off of a principle and that they shouldn't betray it. This is something that they're trying to protect at all costs. And then you can betray the character, what their principle is through action. Exposition oftentimes is not the best way. What you want to do is use visual language. You want to use a symbol that's attached to their premise. So if say a character's premise, if their principle comes from, so let's just say Naruto. All right, Naruto. He has a certain principle. He wants to be the Hokage so that he will be connected with his village. He wants his principle is to be connected. Um, the way he shows that is through his headband. All right, the headband becomes, and then the title of Hokage also becomes a symbol of the principle he's working on, and his platitude, believe it. That's also another. So you want to kind of create associations with the principle they can portray visually, so that you don't have to constantly rely on exposition. You don't want to have to keep telling the audience this is what this is. You know, you create the symbol, you make the association of the symbol to the principle, and then this symbol acts as a placeholder holder every time you need to remind the audience that this is the principle, or the character needs to be reminded this is what is principle. All right. I hope that makes sense. All right. If there's any other questions, I include. Cab is writing something. Let's see what Cab has to say. Hopefully, I can. Hopefully, if I haven't explained certain parts of the notes clearly enough, I can on it on a part two. My mouth is getting very tired. Yes, Cab in One Piece. I believe that Luffy symbol is Luffy's straw. Thank you. Yes, Cab. And then the importance of Luffy's straw hat is because his the straw hat is inherited from a character, a mentor transmits the principle into Luffy. So a lot of shonen, they clearly show the character obtaining the transmission from a mentor, and that's just a that's sort of a mainstay of like shonen. Like in a lot of shonen, they end up showing that Naruto, he had that one teacher, that he was with in chapter one. He transmitted Naruto's values to him in that first chapter. It was brilliantly done, and it followed suit with a lot of other mangas because it's just a very successful manga. I mean, it's a very successful model to show where the principle comes from. Any other questions? No. Arjo's trying to say so. Let's keep it. Coffee's good. It keeps my tongue nated, so I can talk for a little bit longer. Rican says there's a lot I want to ask, but I think it's better served one on one. Yeah, if you guys have a private, I'm actually a little more comfortable typing out responses to any queries that you have. Um, Also, lasts longer. I know there's a recording, but like you would have to look for what I'm talking about, and I kind of jump from place to place. Thanks for bearing with me because I'm still new at this, and then if I do more of this, I know I'll just get. Um, 3 people are trying to talk. Donovan says, "Thank you." Yes, I appreciate it. You're welcome. Thank you very much. Arjo says, "Never mind." Haha. Thanks for the awesome lecture. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for listening to what I have to say. All right, and Cuban says, "Thank you," and I was on target. I appreciate that I was on. I wasn't making up bullshit. All right, Donovan is saying stuff. Really cool. Yes, yes, yes. All right. One of my biggest fears is like I explain something and people get the wrong idea what I'm saying, or if like the language and the word too confusing, it just comes off as mad scribbling, and like that, and they just decide that this counts as anything I have to say. But I appreciate you guys stuck with it. Um, yes, I thank you very much. I am done.